Good afternoon and welcome to episode 14 of Southbank Live. It's the 1st of October here, and what a wild week it has been. In fact, it's been a wild couple of weeks, really, especially here in the UK, where we've seen all manner of chaos play out at the local petrol station. If you're wanting petrol, you're wanting diesel, there have been all manner of shortages, as I'm sure you're very aware. And this week, we're going to be talking about energy specifically. The sector as a whole. But specifically to the UK, I think we could start with, and I brought on our energy specialist, James Allen. James has a very extensive background when it comes to the energy sector, and here he is at Southbank Investment Research making his predictions about the future. But James, just to start with, can you tell us what's been going on? What is the real reason for all these shortages, and what do you think that says about energy in the UK as a whole?
Yeah, thanks, Spurs. So, yeah, it's been a wild week or two in the energy markets. Specifically, we're seeing issues at the forecourts with some shortages with the petrol. There's a Brexit, I think, a Brexit-induced issue here with HGV drivers getting the supplies to the station. But there's a wider issue going on in the energy markets where there's extremely high prices and everyone's scrambling for supply effectively. So this is where we are right now. We're getting a huge massive outbreak of range anxiety, volatile prices spiraling ever higher, unreliable supply, which is proving sort of wholly inadequate just when it's needed, and rolling blackouts in other parts of the world causing industry and factories to idle. But I'm not talking about renewables here. I'm talking about fossil fuels. And so I think this is squarely a fossil fuel derived problem rather than anything to do with renewables, as has been sort of leveled at the renewables industry.
Right. Yeah, on that note, James, yourself and Kit Winder, our other energy specialist at Southbank, very often, whenever we do see high energy prices, Kit's always reminding me, this is going to be great for renewables. So while, we saw oil hit $80 this week, which is very, very good for oil so far this year. This is still good for renewables because it makes renewables, less costly relative to fossil fuels. And, coal is another asset that everyone hates these days, and yet there's been huge demand for it. I think it's up at least 190% since January of this year, which is crazy when you're thinking of an energy source, right? You don't want it to be that volatile and you don't want it to be that expensive. But in terms of what this sort of energy shortage, all the supply chain issues does for renewables, do you think this is very positive, correct?
I do think it's very positive. Yeah, traditionally we've seen when fossil fuel prices spike ever higher, there's been increased demand for renewables, which are even right now they're the cheapest, or they're getting much cheaper than a lot of incumbent sort of fossil fuel supply. I think even in the renewable space, we're seeing the greener renewables, say in terms of hydrogen, for example, we're seeing with sort of natural gas derived blue hydrogen, that's now becoming a bit more expensive actually than, or a green hydrogen is becoming much more economic in terms of cost terms. So we're actually seeing now, whereas the forecasts were for green hydrogen to become sort of competitive in sort of 5-10 years time, actually now with these higher sort of fossil fuel prices, we're seeing green hydrogen come into the money much earlier than predicted. So essentially this is actually very good for the green hydrogen business, and that's another great opportunity for investors.
Yeah, tell me about that. We're not all energy experts, James. What is the difference between green hydrogen and blue hydrogen?
Green hydrogen is made through electrolysis. That's taking sort of surplus renewable electricity, goes to an electrolysis machine effectively, and you come out with hydrogen with a byproduct of water. That's in a nutshell. With blue hydrogen, it's derived from natural gas, and they split the molecules apart, so you get the hydrogens. But it's the natural gas, obviously, is still a fossil fuel, so it's dirty. But then there's added components of they want to store the natural gas, the emissions. So yeah, it's effectively grey hydrogen, which is the natural gas part of it, and then storing the emissions to make it blue hydrogen. So that's been, I suppose, a bit of a panacea essentially from the big oil and big gas industry. They think blue hydrogen is the future, right. Whereas sort of the real green sort of lobby, they're really trying to push green hydrogen. So there's been a bit of an internal battleground between green and blue hydrogen. Actually, with these spikes in sort of natural gas prices, actually green hydrogen is now in the ascendancy.
That's very interesting. I guess a lot of the fossil fuel majors see the blue hydrogen as sort of a compromise, right? It's the bridge from fossil fuels through to a more renewable world.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, and this plays into the debate about natural gas specifically. Natural gas has always been seen as the transition fuel. We need it to help sort of, back up sort of intermittent renewable supply. The gas industry has been very focused on that, and now they're essentially saying the same as with blue hydrogen. That they see that as the future. Once outright, when we sort of start banning natural gas powered heatings, boilers, they actually think their future is in sort of blue hydrogen. So they're actually really trying to promote blue hydrogen, but actually there's a been pushback saying that's not actually massively clean. There's lots of studies been saying actually with all the methane leakage, it's actually not that clean. So green hydrogen is is the future. Whether is the question is cost, and when we get to that promised land, I guess.
Right, right. Now we shall wind back a little bit. Thank you to all who are tuning in to watch this live, or if you're watching a recording as well. If you are interested in hearing more of these, do feel free to subscribe to our YouTube page or to follow our Facebook page if you're watching the live stream there. And of course, do feel free to ask any questions in the chat or to leave a comment down below. We do read those for topics for future videos. Barry says hello to everybody in the chat. Good afternoon, Barry. Hope you're having a good day. We shall be answering a couple of questions. Though, just to start with, James, or just to sort of broaden out what we were talking about, give it a bit more context. If we rewind to before, just a few, it wasn't that long ago when it was quite easy to get petrol or diesel without having to queue forever or to try and sneak in at the right time, things like that. In terms of where Britain was placed and why the crisis has sort of emerged, what you say there's a big Brexit angle to it, and of course there's been lots of supply chain issues just from all of the Wu-flu lockdowns. I mean, what was it specifically? What made Britain so vulnerable to this?
The shortage of HGV drivers has probably been the main single biggest component for the sort of panic, I suppose, the shortage of supply coming to sort of petrol stations. Effectively, I would single that out. The backdrop of that, obviously, it's coincided with a huge spike in all sort of commodities. Essentially, I mean, natural gas has spiked, coal spiked, which is irrelevant to petrol. But it's just created this sort of febrile atmosphere. You then had the government declaring there was no shortage, which actually prompted a bit more sort of panic buying as well. There's been a bit of perfect storm of events. We're seeing it coincide in the retail market with some energy retail companies going bust, and it's just created this atmosphere of one of panic, I guess. And that's where we are today. We're seeing still seeing sort of long queues outside petrol stations and some stations running dry.
Yeah, let's expand on the energy companies going bust. Last time I checked, I think it was 9 energy companies in the UK have gone bust, and it's very sudden, isn't it? I mean, it's almost like there's sort of a domino effect that's taken place, and it's just knocked all these ones out. In terms of what really drove that, was it they're already running on low margins? Was it mostly a supply issue getting electricity out there, or was something else going on?
So the retail business has been a hard market for a while now. We've seen lots of increased entrance into the market. Margins have been low, and they've a lot of them struggled to make money. Traditionally, when we've seen sort of retail companies go bust, it's because they haven't properly hedged sort of future supply. So that's not appeared to be the case this time. This seems to have been a factor because of the retail price cap. So they've not been able to pass on the higher gas and electricity prices onto their customer. It's been sort of capped at the sort of the retail level. So that's what's really sort of this time has driven some of these companies going bust. So it's been a very sad state of affairs. Obviously, the good news is that most sort of retail customers will be sort of generally unaffected by this. But in terms of the companies themselves, obviously it's been a tough time. But the retail sector has been it's not been making much money for a while now. A lot of these companies have been struggling.
Right. Looking at this, it's because it's very sudden, as I say, it's very sudden how this has all happened. Do you think this is going to just even out over time, or do you think we're just due to get more shortages like this, more scares, more panics?
There's obviously the winter now is the big question, right? What's happening in the winter? So we have insanely high natural gas prices, insanely high electricity prices. You could argue that these prices really aren't reflected by fundamentals in some ways. I mean, we saw demand isn't that high at the moment, but we're seeing a lot of panic in the markets right now. I do think this winter is going to be sort of tricky. I think if we're already at these prices now, ahead of winter, ahead of any sort of cold spell. I think there is a danger that we could see even higher prices moving into the winter. In terms of natural gas, a lot depends really what happens with Nord Stream 2. That's the huge pipeline from Russia through into Germany, effectively. Yep. Whether that is allowed to come online. If that does come online, we could see natural gas prices drop. In the UK, obviously in terms of natural gas, we've got, obviously there's a real scramble for LNG as well. Prices for LNG have gone through the roof. There's lots of demand from Asia. So getting those cargoes in is a real struggle right now. This also coincides with the wider thing about gas storage. Inventories are relatively low in Europe. Britain has shut down its main gas storage facility, Rough. That's no longer in service, so we don't really have that buffer anymore. LNG was meant to be the solution for that. We have, rather than having one big storage site, we have lots of mobile storage sites. But if we're struggling to get LNG in, and we're sort of really vulnerable to the pipeline supply from continental Europe. So this is where we are in terms of electricity. I think the electricity market is probably in better shape. I think we will start to see sort of wind output sort of pick up as normal at this time of year. Yeah. And I think there has been some maintenance in sort of some power stations and nuclear stations. Once those stations come back online, I think the power market will settle down. Obviously, the gas prices obviously have had a huge effect on electricity prices as well, because at the moment the gas plants are at the margin. So the next station online is gas effectively. So the traders pay up to what that price is basically. So if gas prices going up, we're at this level. So we're still vulnerable to sort of gas prices, but I think with more power supply coming in, we've just seen an interconnector being commissioned now from Norway as well. That will help as well. So I think that the power market is in better condition for the winter than I'd say the gas market. The gas market's where all eyes are on this winter.
Right. I mean, James, if we do see gas prices continue to surge, what kind of consequences do you think we could expect?
Well, I mean, certainly it'll continue to put pressure on the retail companies. I think more and more of those will struggle. I think if we see more, we're going to struggle full time really for more. There'll be lots of political pressure really to potentially maybe revitalize storage sites in the UK, and maybe from the fossil fuel lobby will say we need more investments in natural gas. Whether that's the solution, I'm very unsure about. Whether for my mind, this is a fossil fuel problem. I don't think the answer is increased investments in fossil fuels. I think, but there's an interesting debate now going on whether we double down on decarbonisation, or actually we think we should try and increase sort of fossil fuel natural gas supply, because it's quite obvious right now that the market isn't quite working. Britain, in terms of its natural gas, we are reliant on sort of pipeline supply from continental Europe, and LNG. There's bigger, stronger markets out there that will pay lots of money. So, and without that sort of storage buffer, I think we're struggling. So the political pressure, the political angle is going to be very interesting to see. But certainly for this winter, I think, unfortunately, I think some of the retail companies will continue to be under pressure.
Right. Now, before we get on to the renewable side, I think we should take a look through the chat, which is very lively today. It's always good to see. Mike comments, hi, if Nord Stream isn't streaming, with demand being strangled by supply issues, then LPG importing must be where to look. So that is, liquefied petroleum gas, I assume. James, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so LPG isn't a substitute for natural gas. So I think he might mean LNG. I mean, LPG prices are also going through the roof right now. So LPG is like propane, butane. It's used for sort of heating and some sort of cooking appliances. It's not a direct substitute for natural gas. So I think he might mean LNG. Now, LNG prices, if Nord Stream doesn't come on stream in the new year, then LNG prices will have a further support, I think. We'll be even more reliant on LNG. But the question is, will we get those cargoes in? So that's where the market will be really watching this winter. I think LNG for years, actually. I mean, LNG, we've not actually, because gas prices have been quite low, we've not actually needed all that much LNG compared to where we were
Right.
sort of 10 years ago. So the market's been in a state of surplus, essentially. But now, obviously, we do need those cargoes, but it's coinciding with lots of demand from Asia, and they're willing to pay lots of money to get those cargoes in. So there's a real scramble for those cargoes right now. So that's going to be very interesting to watch this winter.
Right. You, of course, earlier you did say, James, there's sort of a Brexit angle to this amongst others. Barry says, I wonder where all the drivers went. They disappeared in the UK, Poland and Italy, so I hear. Are they all on holiday? Do you know where they might have gone, James?
Well, I think they've gone back home. I think it's been pretty clear. The governments that have extended or reopened some visas for drivers from sort of the EU for a 3-month window heading up to Christmas. So that seems to suggest that was the issue. And I think it's be interesting to see if they come back for those 3 months. So I think that has been the main reason for the lack of HGV drivers in the market. But I'm told that there are lots of applications now for in the works for people wanting to become HGV drivers in the UK. I think we have a 100,000 a man or woman sort of shortage of drivers, and I think there's sort of 50 odd thousand going through the process of getting the requisite sort of permits and licenses. So hopefully in the short term this will sort of or medium term this will sort of even itself out.
Right. Thank you for that question, Barry. Brian, similarly to what you were saying, James, saying DVLA has a massive backlog in processing HGV applications, I hear. I do wonder whether or not that was the case, like for how long that has been the case and how much that might have contributed to this whole crisis.
Yeah, no, the sort of HGV sort of authority, the regulatory, the body sort of represents all the drivers. They've been warning about this for a long time, actually. Predates Brexit. They've been saying we have a shortage of drivers. It's only going to get worse. I think Brexit actually just accentuated that, and it made the situation worse. But I think we've had a shortage for a while now. Actually, I think those in the industry have been warning about that for a long time. So Brexit has just only made it worse.
Yeah, Talala comments, British HGV drivers say working conditions are dire, so they won't return to driving. It does beg the question, why aren't the companies that the couriers, the carriers that do run all of these drivers, why don't they just raise some wages, and then maybe then there would be a lot more drivers. And I wonder how much that sort of plays into the idea that we're going to see much more wage inflation more broadly in future.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think that probably will happen. That have huge sort of inflationary pressure, or put even more pressure potentially on the pump across energy across the board. So one to watch. Yeah, I mean, it's not a great time now to be sort of raising energy prices even higher right now. So, but unfortunately, I think that probably will have to be the solution. I think there's that would be the best way to sort of encourage more people to become HGV drivers.
Yeah. If you inflate the cost of energy, ultimately you inflate the cost of everything, because everything requires energy. And it does seem like we're seeing that just across the energy space these days, especially with some of the commodities. Another question from Harry. Hi guys, I love the Mad Max banner. Thank you, Harry. That's very kind of you. I do wonder whether or not we'll continue to see some of the skirmishes that we've seen in the forecourts. There are videos of people fighting. Really getting into fisticuffs over who goes first at the pump. Somebody commented to me the other day that the next Anthony Joshua fight was going to be in a BP forecourt, which would be rather amusing, of course, but maybe a little too extreme. In terms of on hydrogen, Joe comments, hydrogen, I believe it requires new pipework to replace the existing copper in properties, and he says that'll be very expensive. What's your take on that, James?
Yes, that's true. I mean, but essentially, a lot of the existing infrastructure we have for natural gas, a lot of that can still be used as well. So yes, it's not seen as, or some people suggest that we can just pour all that hydrogen into the natural gas infrastructure and just like deliver all this hydrogen into homes. It's by no means as simple as that. There's a huge engineering infrastructure challenge to do that. But I mean, I don't think we're not going to see sort of 100% hydrogen going through our pipes into our homes anytime soon. Let's put it that way. We might see a bit of blending going on. There's a trial going up in sort of up in Kiel in North England about blending some of our natural gas supply with about 10% or so of hydrogen. Right. That might be rolled out a bit more extensively, and that might be the future. But I don't think we're going to see anytime soon 100% hydrogen coming through our pipes. I think, who knows, way down the line, but it is a big sort of engineering and very costly challenge to do that.
In terms of just off the top of your head, James, in terms of the sort of the average cost, do you think that would be per home, for example? Can you give a figure, or is it still hard to estimate?
No, impossible to estimate right now. I think
Right.
it will obviously depend on the cost of hydrogen, what type of hydrogen we're using.
Yep.
It's at the time frames. I think that'd be quite hard for me to suggest. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Further to what you were saying earlier about the storage facilities, Brian says gas shortage partially due to government action closing down storage facilities, especially compared to Europe. Now, James, what do you actually know what was behind that? The decisions that were made to end that, was that part of a green initiative, or was it something else?
It was actually sort of a market decision. These storage sites, the rough wasn't actually being utilised all that much, certainly not how it was sort of 15, 20 years ago. It required a lot of investment to keep it going, whether to get it back up to speed. It was quite an old facility. And I think actually the decision was made, it didn't justify making, I think it was, a lot of money. I can't think right off the top of my head. I think it was over £1 trillion to bring it back up to speed.
Right.
Might not be that much actually, but because we'd had relatively benign conditions in natural gas markets, because LNG was the new flavour of the month. LNG was seen as this alternative to sort of big natural gas caverns. We'd have just thousands of mini storage sites moving around the world and delivering gas when it's needed. The decision was taken. We don't need this facility in the North Sea. We can also utilise the European natural gas caverns as well. So that was the decision. And in hindsight, it's probably been the wrong decision considering where we are today.
Big time. Do you think there'll be efforts to restore the previous capacity due to what's happened?
Potentially, I think that could be. There will be the fossil fuel lobby, the natural gas lobby might well be saying, listen, we need to diversify our supply of natural gas even more. We need increased investment in natural gas. Part of that will be in natural gas storage in the UK and in Europe. Let's see. I mean, that's the multi-million-dollar question. Are the regulators and politicians going to sort of double down on decarbonisation in terms of pushing more towards renewables, or are they going to think actually we need to increase investment in natural gas as a transition fuel? And that's the multi-million-dollar question. We'll see what happens.
Right. Barry has the impression that EU policy was blocking or slowing Britain from building adequate power infrastructure. Let's face it, it was them who wanted us to reduce it in the first place. Do you have any take on that, James? Because I'm not familiar with how much EU policy dictated British strategic power infrastructure.
I think there's some sort of state aid rules which sort of limited some capacity being built or capacity being proposed. I think the bigger question really is in one of cost. I think, for example, nuclear. Really, that's been we're still waiting for.
Sorry about that, folks. A slight disruption due to internet outage. I was going to refer to a couple of comments that we did get in the chat here. Some sort of contrasting views. Enderman says, great points. Can the green system power the whole of Britain? While Brian comments, wind doesn't blow, sun doesn't shine, renewables less than 2% of total electricity energy generation. Pathetic. So two sort of different views on green power, and of course on the fossil fuels and their dominance here in the UK. Now, James, I would assume that your approach would be that while renewables are still a minority share of total power generation, that this will grow a lot more in the future, and that crises like this will only increase their dominance.
Yeah, exactly right. I think the answer to this crisis really is in more renewable capacity. I think. But obviously that you can't just say that willy-nilly. We need investments in battery storage. We need the technology to improve in long-term grid scale battery storage to help substitute intermittent renewable supplies. And let's not forget, we also potentially need low carbon nuclear as well to offer some of that sort of base load supply as well. So I think with a combination of those, I think we can get there. I think this crisis has shown that natural gas is extremely volatile. It's at the mercy of sort of foreign actors. I think now the time is really to double down on decarbonisation and push renewables. I don't think renewables has been the issue at all for this crisis. We're blaming a few calm days in the North Sea for record electricity and gas prices. That's just not. We have to be clear. This is a gas problem. We've actually seen wind generation pick up over the last few days. Yet power prices are still 3 times higher than they were last year. So, I think it's clear, really, if we're all being honest with ourselves, this is a natural gas issue, and that's where the issue is. And I think it's time to sort of maybe lessen our dependence on natural gas.
Speaking of dependence on natural gas, of course, with Nord Stream 2 and Russia being, a very large gas station, if one were, I believe one of the US presidents referred to Russia as a gas station masquerading as a country, which is of course very, very derogatory. But just in terms of Russia's power and influence through its natural gas, and with Nord Stream 2 going through into Germany, well, some people wonder whether or not the Russian government is deliberately restricting that gas in order to cause chaos and increase people's dependency and increase the appetite for making sure Nord Stream 2 goes ahead and is fully functioning. Do you give any credence to that, James?
You just don't know. There's certainly an argument to say, obviously, this crisis actually sort of plays in Putin's hands in terms of if they want the EU to rubber stamp Nord Stream 2 sort of in the new year, then this actually sort of helps Putin. But the question is whether they have this gas available right now to help Europe. They would say they don't. So that's actually a very, very hard question to answer. But we do know that supplies are lower, through sort of Ukraine and Poland, they are lower. That's fed into sort of lower inventories and gas inventories into Germany and the Netherlands. And this is where we are. So we don't quite know the motivations for this lower gas, but it's certainly contributed. I'd say contributed. There's a few factors at play, but I'd say that's the main one to where we are today in the gas market.
And it's certainly aiding, it's certainly aiding the Russian government and giving them a bit more influence.
You're completely right. Yeah, we're at a very sort of sensitive time. Nord Stream is essentially built now. It's ready. EU, the US are very anti it. Yep. EU, Germany has been pretty pro, but we'll have to see what the EU decides to do with it, whether it allows those molecules to come into, or the gas to come into Europe. We'll see. Yeah.
James, do you expect that they will? Do you think they'll be given the full green light?
It's so hard to say, but I mean, Germany sort of has been sort of pro-Russian gas for a long time now, and that's why we've already seen the original Nord Stream. It's put Europe in a position of being quite dependent on Russian gas. I would probably say there's a great chance it does. It is sort of sanctioned off, I think. But at the same time, Europe is meant to be having this big sort of decarbonisation agenda. Those 2 points aren't really sort of consistent with each other. So I would probably say that it probably is going to be given the green lights, but I wouldn't necessarily say that's the right decision.
Right. It is very interesting when you get the geopolitics at play, and of course the Trump administration was really, really anti Nord Stream 2. Biden administration is slightly softer on that, and whatever does happen will change the shape of Europe and the EU as we know it. So a very, very important thing to be paying attention to. Looking again at the chat, we do have plenty of comments here, which is great to see. Talala says, Britain has tons of natural coal deposits we're afraid to touch. Now, this is a very, very sensitive topic, as one would imagine, especially when we're talking about renewables. I remember, just from feels forever ago, but before the last election, we had Jeremy Corbyn going to some of the old coal mining places saying we're going to help out, not being specific as to opening coal mines. As I did mention earlier, the price of coal has gone up an awful lot over the past year. We're looking at 190%. That was an article on the FT. I think that was 2 days ago. So the prices should be still around that level, which is a huge rally to see. James, I mean, do you think if we still get continued strength in the coal price, whether or not Britain might actually start mining coal again?
Yeah, I think we had to forget that idea. I think coal is not the solution, really. I think we had to recognise that coal is incredibly dirty. We also have to remember, really, that the whole sort of EU ETS market, coal generators are sort of, with carbon prices also going up, they're essentially penalised. The UK also has a carbon tax as well. I just don't see any investment going into reviving coal in this country. It's just, I think it's just a bit of a non-starter. And the question really is how to get other sort of European countries, sort of Germany and Poland, and also sort of wider afield and sort of Asia, China, for example, off coal. I think that's the question, rather than trying to revitalize the UK's coal industry.
Okay, maybe a slightly less controversial topic, or maybe almost as controversial, really. We do have a couple of comments on fracking. Is fracking an answer to the gas shortage? What happened to fracking? Say David and Dennis, which I think is a very, very good question. What do you think? Yeah, what do you make of that, James? What? Of course, I know you're not hugely into fracking, just as you're not hugely into coal, but just in terms of where we stand and whether or not fracking could arrive in Britain, is that something? A consequence of this that you might see?
You'll probably certainly get more questions of that nature. The UK does, by all sort of estimates, sort of sits on quite a sizable onshore sort of exactly for gas. But politically, I just can't see it happening. There's lots of question marks over sort of earthquakes, the on-site, above ground sort of destruction of the local communities, getting that through. I just can't see it happening. I think there's been a push away from fracking over the last 5-10 years, even in the US, certainly in Europe. 10 years ago, fracking was seen as the sort of a great white hope of the natural gas industry, but it's who knows? There probably will be that those conversations will reignite. But again, I just can't see fracking being pushed as a viable solution to what's going on right now. I think certainly for the UK, I think they will look more towards renewables. They might start thinking about sort of natural gas storage, or maybe some regasification sort of terminals for LNG. But I just don't see fracking moving high up the agenda. There's a big environmental lobby against fracking, and I just can't see those that being mitigated against, essentially.
Right. We're talking about DVLA and the number of HGV drivers. Neil comments that DVLA striking won't have helped that shortage of drivers that we've got, which is an interesting comment. Thank you for that, Neil. I hadn't actually heard about DVLA striking, but that is an interesting, adds another edge to this sort of perfect storm we've got here in the UK.
Exactly. I was going to say just that. So all these multitude of factors happening at the same time leads us to where we are.
Yeah, very, very unlucky. Another few questions on natural gas is dangerous, but hydrogen is extremely dangerous, says Brian. Is the Hindenburg stigma still with hydrogen, James?
There is still a stigma towards hydrogen after the Hindenburg disaster. It's a highly flammable gas, but there's lots of investment going into sort of storage tanks, and lots of hydrogen is actually transported as ammonia as well, which is a lot sort of safer as well. There hasn't been a hydrogen disaster for many years. There's a small explosion in Norway on a hydrogen forecourt a couple of years ago, which certainly didn't help matters. But they're very, very rare these days. Let's not forget, we also get bad things happening in the fossil fuel market. And any gas like natural gas or hydrogen that sort of combusts in an out of control way is going to be bad news. So every fuel has its downsides and upsides, and I'd say hydrogen has more things going for it than against.
Right. David asks, what about storage for wind and solar? Do you foresee a bigger demand for storage, James? It does seem rather inevitable with the rollout of more renewables.
Yeah, 100%. Storage is the answer. Essentially, we need to get more grid scale, long duration storage, lithium ion or lithium ion batteries online. I think that will help a lot. Let's not forget, with technology coming along, with more people using electric vehicles as well. I mean, essentially, soon enough, everyone's electric vehicle is going to be a small sort of mobile storage unit where they can sort of sell surplus power back into the grid and to help balance the grid. So that, in a sense, down the line, that will be how we sort of help balance the grid as well. So storage for renewables is of course, it's the multi-million-dollar and multi-trillion-dollar sort of industry upcoming, basically.
Right. Yeah, it does seem like a pretty hot sector. I mean, just on that note, James, just over the past year, if we sort of detach ourselves from the crisis here we have when it comes to energy in Britain, In terms of storage and the developments in the tech for energy storage for electric vehicles, or just for the huge batteries that Tesla were trying to do for homes, has there been a lot of development there, or has things sort of been on hold during the whole lockdown situation?
No, there's been huge amounts of developments. I mean, so much money has been pouring into renewables across the board, like in some never been seen before, but specifically in energy storage and in batteries. And that's where lots of time and lots of money has been devoted to. We all know that increasing the duration and the durability of batteries, will really sort of be the perfect fit, the final piece in the jigsaw really for renewables. So that's a lot of attention is going into that. The company that really, cracks batteries, lithium-ion batteries on grid scale, will be just a huge mammoth titan of industry. So there's lots and lots of investment going towards battery storage.
Right, and plenty of investment opportunities in that as well, I imagine, because there are plenty of companies that are playing in that space.
There's huge amounts of opportunity. I mean, last year, battery stocks had a great time of it, and there's lots happening, lots of catalysts coming now, which suggest they could also continue to have a good time of it as well. I mean, it's been a very sort of fertile ground for battery storage and battery storage stocks. There's lots of stocks now coming on the market, really trying to tackle that problem.
Right. It does seem like a sector within the energy sector as a whole. There's certainly plenty of opportunities, plenty of speculative opportunities in there over in the years to come. Do have quite a few comments on nuclear. John comments 20% of UK electricity is generated by nuclear power. 40% of that is due to disappear in the next 5 years as our aging nuclear units are decommissioned. Thank you for that, John. And Neil also comments, we have to integrate new nuclear into the mix. James, we've seen a very interesting rally in uranium recently. A lot of people are wondering, when people have been, allergic to nuclear power since Fukushima, the F word, as it's called in energy circles. Do you think nuclear is going to have its renaissance in the near future?
Yeah, essentially. And if you're looking at the price that the UK government is paying for sort of the strike price for Hinkley Point, it's about £90 a megawatt hour. Now, actually, that's looking quite good value now.
Right.
I think nuclear is a real sort of a solution. Essentially, it's low carbon. I think there is a huge anti nuclear group, not specifically in UK actually, but in mainland Europe and specifically in Germany.
Right.
But I think it's been a mistake to actually shut down some of these existing nuclear power plants, which are sort of performing perfectly well. I think that has contributed to where we are today right now. I think it's very expensive to build a new nuclear power station. So it's been a mistake to close down the ones that we had before. So I think in time, I think smaller SMR reactors, they're a bit cheaper, they're a bit more sort of more flexible. That will be a really good investment opportunity as well. I think we'll hopefully see more of those come online as well, really. But I do think it's been a mistake to shut down some of these existing nuclear power stations. I think it's shown that we actually need that sort of solid baseload supply.
Yes, I do wonder, who's going to make sort of the big step, because of course it costs a lot of money just to set things up. It takes a lot of time. It does feel like it'll be, once there has been one big surge in favor of nuclear in this country, maybe that'll sort of open the floodgates to much more development.
Yeah, the floodgates and nuclear don't really go hand in hand because it takes so long to build. There's always so many delays.
Yeah.
Let's get Hinkley Point up and running, and hopefully that will sort of quell some of the anti-nuclear sort of lobby. It's performing well, creating lots of jobs, and that might stimulate the debates even further. But these projects are big, expensive, timely, and very costly. So, but I'm certainly not against nuclear at all. New nuclear, I think it would be very helpful right now.
On the topic of Hinkley, we do have some comments in the chat on it. With Hinkley is overpriced, in foreign hands, and way behind schedule. Great planning. There are, of course, Hinkley. It's a very political decision that they've made. I assume that you support the nuclear energy side of it. This is good for the country. But just in terms of sort of the manner in which it's been introduced, have you any comments on that, James? Do you think could have been done better?
No, I had to think where we were sort of 5-10 years ago when Hinkley Point was being pushed through. I think it was we had a better relationship with France, for example, at that point. Yeah. I think And actually, in hindsight, actually, I mean, there's been lots of talk about how expensive it is. Strike price is around £90 a megawatt hour, which, it was expensive, but actually now it's looking relatively good value, really. But of course, it's extremely expensive, and I'm sure they'll change things now. But we are where we are. Nuclear we're not this isn't the first station which has been had lots of delays, been overpriced. And that is the nature of the beast. I think the future really will be in SMR reactors. And I think the wider thing is we've made a mistake in shutting down our existing or decommissioning our existing nuclear power stations. I think that's where, if we had our time again, there'd be more pressure to keep those stations open.
Yes, yeah. Now we do have, we were speaking about batteries a second ago. Pro Evidence comments, lithium batteries are prone to catch fire. Liquid calcium sounds scary. What do you think of vanadium flow batteries? Very specific question here from Pro Evidence. James, you any thoughts on vanadium flow batteries?
Yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff going on in vanadium flow. It's seen as a bit of a solution. It's not quite there yet. It's still a relatively niche angle of the market, but there's lots of different sort of battery technologies coming down the line. It's not just lithium ion. There's also sort of iron itself, actually, silicon batteries as well. They all offer sort of competing advantages and disadvantages. Lithium ion is in the lead right now, but I would say no technology has completely cracked it. So we don't have that solution right now where we can store lots and lots of power for a great period of time and then release it in huge quantities. They need to be charged. They degrade, and as the person who just wrote in, occasionally do catch fire as well. So that's I would say that's incredibly rare. But vanadium flow is a very interesting space to watch. There's some really interesting stocks in that space.
On the topic of batteries, James, we've got a comment here on decommissioning spent batteries containing lithium and cobalt, etc., will present problems of its own. That's from Brian. James, I mean, what's your thought on that? Because to me, it seems like it presents its own investment opportunity, is whoever it is that's going to be dealing with all these decommissioned batteries.
Yeah, and there's lots of stocks and companies right now who are setting up recycling companies to recycle some of these batteries and do the circular economy and put them back into commission, essentially. And that is going to be a very interesting space to watch. Maybe not sort of over the short term, but as all these sort of batteries come to their end of life. In sort of 5-10 years time, I think there'll be lots of recycling around. So that's an incredibly exciting investment opportunity as well. There's a few really interesting stocks in that space.
Very good. Now, we have been going on for quite a while. I do thank everybody who has tuned in. We have had a very active chat, which is always great to see. James, I think we can tackle maybe one more topic before we head off for today. And this comes from Matthew. We weren't going to be discussing it anyway, but Matthew's chimed in with, I see the $3.5 trillion USA green energy bill has not passed the Senate vote yet. This is a very interesting and huge amount of money, but a very interesting topic. The whole Green New Deal has, there's all manner of rhetoric about it from the likes of AOC and all of the sort of progressive firebrands in the States. What's your take on this? Because, of course, $3.5 trillion, that's even today, it's still a lot of money. And it does seem like it would be a watershed moment if we did see that pass.
Yes, so the vote hasn't been passed. There's actually no vote last night, but it's still on the table. It's by no means dead whatsoever. We might actually see, there's two packages here. There's the 1.2 trillion infrastructure package, but there's a bigger reconciliation package, which also directs funds to climate change and clean energy. And they're sort of being negotiated sort of at the same time. There's lots of leverage going on in terms of some senators won't vote for one without the other. But I think we'll certainly see, we will see the smaller package being passed. The question then comes what level, how much spending will go into the second bigger package. Now, 3.5 trillion is, as you say, is a lot of money. Some of the sort of centrist Democrats or the more moderate Democrats they are like Senator Manchin, he's now put a ceiling on it. He's saying $1.5 trillion. Now, if it goes through as $1.5 trillion, I mean, that's still a hell of a lot of money. I mean, and lots of that will be directed towards clean energy. So there'll be lots of political sort of maneuvering going on in the next today and days and weeks going on. But I do think this will be an absolutely huge catalyst for clean energy. I think we have to remember that for every dollar that the public purse points to clean energy, it will be at least matched, maybe more, by the private sector. There's lots of sort of private sector leveraging goes on as well. So I think this is a huge opportunity for the green tech space. Actually, I think last night's vote or non-vote was I don't see it as all bad news at all. I think we'll get there. It's just a question of what level will we see the larger package at, basically.
When it comes to, so say, if we do assume that if things proceed as you expect, James, is there a bias to that bill in terms of the types of renewable energy? Maybe the contractors who'd get a lot of that money. Is there in terms of what that bill sort of directs money into in the renewable energy space? Is there particular biases that we would be looking for?
Electric vehicles is Biden's been quite clear about electrifying sort of the public fleets, governmental fleets
Right.
So that would be a very interesting space. Lots of money is going into sort of the network of EV chargers, making school buses fully electric as well, and things like that. So that'd be a very interesting space. But I mean, Biden's got a plan to really get all fossil fuels off the grid, the power grid, by 2035, I think. So that just creates huge opportunities for the incumbent renewables, solar and wind, and down the line, sort of things like hydrogen as well. I mean, there's money going towards hydrogen, and also this money will also help the next phase of technology for renewables as well. There'll be solar and wind really are the benefits of clean tech boom number one, which has happened a decade or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So all this money going to now will fund the next technologies, which we'll see come online in great velocity in another 10 years as well. So I can only see this as really good news for the clean tech space. I think costs continue to come down. I think renewables is a deflationary. All the feedback loops of learning and technology, I think it just creates this. We're very lucky to be living as investors through this situation where we have this opportunity in renewables. We all know we need to clean the grids really over a period of time. The question is when, but I think with this money we'll get there sooner rather than later.
Right. James, it has been a great conversation as ever. One last thing, if we have a bit of time, which is on tidal power. And because, of course, we're an island nation, we should have plenty of that going around. And there are tidal projects that have been posted over the time. We got a question from Neil on one in Wales, also one in the Clyde. From David, in terms of, do you think we're going to see a lot more of that for tidal power generation in the UK?
Oh, so hard. Tidal power has been talked about for so long. No one's really cracked it. It's very expensive, and doing anything underwater is expensive in terms of maintenance as well.
Right.
The 7 project in Wales had some sort of environmental negative sort of outcomes to that as well. So that didn't sort of the government sort of rejected that effectively. So I'm not hopeful we'll see sort of tidal come online in any form of scale anytime soon. I think we might see some sort of small isolated projects, but it's been quite a tricky one to make money off tidal power. I think no company's really cracked it. So it's quite an expensive endeavor. I think we'll see more. We'll see more things like sort of floating offshore wind, which floating turbines that can go a bit further out than sort of traditional sort of fixed turbines. Elsewhere in sunnier climes, we'll see floating solar as well. I think that will be a good solution as well. It's a shame because tidal, any form of marine power should be good for an island nation like the UK, but no one's really ever cracked this, I'm afraid.
Right. Maybe it'll be, the future of energy, and it always will be kind of a white elephant project. Will be interesting to see over time. Now, I think we have used up our time for today. Folks, thank you all for tuning in to episode 14 of Southbank Live. It has been very interesting. I think it was the first time we've had James on. It was a very good, very lively chat today, which is always good to see. If you're watching a recording of this and there's some topics you'd like us to cover in the future, do feel free to leave a comment below. And of course, do subscribe because that really does help us out here. But that is all from us for the moment. James, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.